And we're back. Extemp for speech debaters and everyone else. Welcome back to another half-hour podcast. We are here today to talk about artificial intelligence. Ooh. I know this probably comes out a week after spooky season, but if we were to do it on spooky season, I don't know, maybe dressing up as ChatGPT could freak out a lot of people. Or honestly, dress up as a deep fake. You don't even need a costume. You just gotta be yourself, you know? It's most low effort type of costume you could do. Wow, we should have really talked more about Halloween in the last
I
episode.
dress
Yeah.
up as the AI generated image of your high school yearbook photo that all of you did. We all know it.
But
Have you not seen that?
no, I haven't.
This is
I mean,
a
they don't dress up for that. They would
no.
literally just be that.
It's a recent trend. We're going to talk
Hmm.
a lot about this in this episode, so I'm very glad that we're bringing this up right away. It's a recent trend where you take a picture of yourself, you put it into an AI generated thing, and you tell it to give you generated pictures of yourself in terms of
Oh,
your
that's
yearbook.
what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
dress up as that.
I see. You could do that. You
Yeah.
know, I tried one of those AI things for like a LinkedIn photo. Yo, it creeped me out. Like it does not look like me and it just made me super uncomfortable. So I'm like, maybe AI technology is just not for me. Anyway.
Th- this is this is a very interesting topic. We talked about this in the last episode. Our intros are great. We're on fire with them. Trust. Hey,
Let it cook.
um, let's talk about exactly why it's actually good to talk about AI before we jump into this. We don't really do a lot of episodes on science and technology, and honestly, next week we're going to do another episode that's kind of out of the blue that doesn't get talked about a lot in Extemp either, but is a good topic, and that is gonna. I'll give the alluding to we're going into entertainment next week, which is kind of interesting. Um, but why you want to talk about science and technology is because it does affect our everyday lives and can, in fact, create a pretty massive impact, as you'll learn by the end of this episode. So, whenever there's new technologies that are coming out or science finds something really crazy, it's worth discussing. They're very rare extemp questions, but I've found in my speech and debate career that picking topics like these do tend to do pretty well, and because they stand out in a room of six people. So if we're talking about being competitive in extemp, then picking a question that's like technology actually does stand out in a crowd when a lot of those topics are political, social, or economical, because it does change the flavor of the room.
Yeah, I think never really was a big fan of tech questions when I did extemp, but that's just because it's I don't do domestic a lot, and that's just where these questions usually tend to pop up, in the Wyoming circuit at least. But whenever I was handed a tech question, it wasn't the hardest question to answer. And I think it's because we interact with it on a daily basis, right? Like you follow us, you should be following us on social media. And with the new, not new, but with the more emphasis on social media being a place where we find information and trust the information that we're finding, we kind of have just built-in trust on what we see on social media, which can be very dangerous because not everything you see is real. And especially with the rise in generative AI and deep fakes and that type of technology, it really poses a lot of interesting questions for how we as people will interpret these technologies and whether or not we can be manipulated by them. And honestly, we are every day, we are manipulated by these technologies. And this isn't to say that we're old people and we're get off your phones, young people, but more of opening the door to having a conversation about effects of AI and how we can overcome that or how we can deal with them.
And AI has both very positive and very negative impacts, right? And that's one of the other things why we talk about this, right? So we want to showcase exactly what those positive and negative impacts are towards society. Is most of the time when we're talking about technology, it's going to be societal impacts. It can be political from time to time, but oftentimes we're going to talk about those societal impacts, about like what it's going to do to you and I, because it will have a lot more of a individual impact here than it will have like a worldwide impact kind of thing. So that's kind of the idea of what this episode is. And we want to be picking topics like this from time to time, because also it gives you and I a break of talking from the regular big political like hot head hot topics, right? But we also get to talk about things that are really happening, right? Within like big changes and big revolutions. I believe we've done podcasts before about like Musk buying Twitter, and I don't remember if we did a blockchain podcast or not, but if we did, it's probably at some point in time in season 2, or season 1, one of the two. But nonetheless, this is a good topic. We pick these from time to time because they're good to discuss about, and we should be talking about AI.
All right. You want to start us off?
Let's go ahead and let's start it off. Did a little rambling at the beginning. That's fine. It's really good for extempers though to really know like why we're talking about this, and it's good for you to understand and kind of interpret what's all happening. So, what happened with AI this year? This was potentially one of the biggest booms of AI that you have probably seen, and we get the great opportunity to talk about it. 2023 will be known as the year that generative artificial intelligence, or AI, broke out. Now, what is generative AI? A solid definition would be a type of AI that, quote, describes algorithms that can be used to create new content, including audio, code, images, text, simulation, and videos. Essentially, generative AI changes the way that we do content creation. So, a great example of a generative AI would be like, I wanted to put something in a script to write up a part for my podcast stuff here, which I didn't, by the way, but you could, right? And you would ask it to create a full on script that talks about generative AI, right? Which would be my essential background segment. We have all mostly heard of ChatGPT. This is a generative AI, but a specific type of generative AI. According to LinkedIn, which is a credible source but would not recommend using this in speeches, by the way, ChatGPT is a language model that can generate human like responses to user prompts. This would be an example of how generative AI can be applied. But do remember that ChatGPT is just a specific type of generative AI. A full generative AI model would just be able to generate content creation. The thing I want to talk mostly about with artificial intelligence, however, is what's called disruptive innovation. And this is what we really saw this year. You may also hear the term Moore's Law. In the sources of this video, I have provided a book that's called Rise of the Robots by Martin Ford. In my opinion, this is not the most thrilling book to read, but it helps make the case for what is happening with AI, and honestly what we have seen across since 2020. AI really has exploded in the last few years, and I only see that's going to continue to do so. And I think YuYu probably agrees on this front that AI is only continuing to be more innovative as we go on. Essentially, the concept of disruptive innovation is that technology breaks the normal ways that innovation works. And I might do a little bit more visual stuff on the screen here, so bear with. It's better maybe to watch this part on YouTube. Because innovation usually follows a simple path. A new idea gets created, then others innovate off of that idea until it plateaus. And then at this point, it falls down and no more ideas are built off of the original idea. This is the typical path of innovation is it always starts, it increases, plateaus, and then it drops. Disruptive innovation is this, but it's disruptive. Instead of plateauing, a new idea gets innovated off of an old idea and it continues over and over again. So it continues in this form of S curves. Hey, so essentially, the idea of hearing the term S curve is that innovation continues in constant S motions. So things get built off of old ideas and continue to transform over time. And this is kind of where Moore's law comes into place. It shows disruptive innovation in action. Moore's law is, quote, the observation that the number of transistors on a computer chip doubles approximately every 2 years. So this is essentially disruptive innovation in action. So say this is a really bad example, but let's say a computer chip was equal to 1. And let's just do some very simple math, right? In 2 years, that computer chip is equal to 2, right? So it's doubled every 2 years. In another 2 years, that computer chip is equal to 4, then 8, then 16. See how it builds off of each other. It always constantly doubles every 2 years. This is disruptive innovation. And basically, this means that technology becomes more and more advanced and doubles over the process of every 2 years. So, what we're seeing with this boom here in 2023, in 2025, it's going to be even more crazy and it's going to expand more, right? We talked a lot about in 2021 the huge rise of Bitcoin, blockchain becoming massive. 2 years later, now we're talking about the boom of generative AI. This is the idea of disruptive innovation and why we're talking so much about it. It's basically going into effect as we discuss the increase of generative AI. This has a really important purpose in this podcast, and quite frankly, any future podcast we talk about technology in. The reason why generative AI is breaking out in 2023 is because this is a new technology that has been innovated off of old technology, and we will only see this be built off of technology, and it will continue to improve. Generative AI is the start of more advanced technologies, and we will only see more be built off of generative AI. So this is maybe a little complicated and a little complex, but like I said, if you go and you read the book Rise of the Robots, it doesn't explain generative AI, but it explains these S curves and the idea of disruptive innovation. And disruptive innovation, YuYu, is a really important concept because, as you and I have seen from starting in 2016, from myself doing Extemp, uh, and over a process of our years doing Extemp to this point, AI has gotten a lot more advanced, and I would argue that it has in fact doubled in its power every 2 years.
Yeah. AI is such a up and coming and scary thing, and like, oh, disruptive innovation. Honestly, like that word just gives me trauma because it shoots me back to 2018. We're doing a pharmaceuticals topic, and disruptive innovation is like one of the arguments. It's a whole thing. But yeah, along similar lines, like AI is just only going to continue to innovate and to get better and to, like build off of what it is and build off of what it will be. Like if you think about it, computer it wasn't really like a computer until very recently. I'd say about like 2 decades ago, so like early 2000s, which is crazy, because like we've come so far from that, and we have so much more access to so many different technologies that it definitely makes us question what is going to be our future. Like, are we going to be in a sci-fi movie, right? Like, and I think recently a lot of people have been commenting a lot about how our lives are just more and more like Black Mirror episodes. which they have a point. It does seem like that. So let's talk about that a little bit deeper. So most of you are probably thinking about technology like ChatGPT and how it affects our education, what that means for writing essays in the future and things like that. Which, by the way, I will say right now, like ChatGPT isn't great at writing your essays. Like I can tell when you've been using ChatGPT to write essays, right? And I think your teachers will know too. So just don't do it, right? Especially if it's against the rules. But besides that, like looking at deep fakes and looking how good that generative AI is at mimicking your image and mimicking your person, because it's not just like, oh, it can mimic us, that's so cool, ha ha ha, but its ability to mimic politicians, its ability to edit images, things like that. It has a lot of implications for the way we perceive information and the way we think, like, what is it that we're seeing and is what we're seeing even true? Right? Because most people don't even question that when they go on social media. Most people are just like, whoa, like, I didn't know that happened. And their first response is not like, is this real? So, this isn't a new fear among people. This is something that we've been talking about for a long time, especially since the rise of our computers and screens and things like that. So it's a lot as a concern for multiple facets of our life. But since we've already got it on our minds, and since the last episode that we talked about were the ways that, we could use AI in elections and the potential for it to be abused slightly in terms of like social media, but same gist. Let's talk about it here, right? From Politico, they say President Joe Biden will deploy numerous federal agencies to monitor the risks of artificial intelligence and develop new uses for the technology while attempting to protect workers, according to a draft executive order obtained by Politico, end quote. And so we already see that President Joe Biden and his administration is trying to target AI because they view it as a threat. And it's not just that. Like Congress is also turning their attention to AI and its ability to affect our elections and what we deem as true. So, for example, in the Senate, we have the Protect Elections from Deceptive AI Act that addresses the threats posed to our elections by the use of AI to generate materially deceptive content to spread, oh my God, to spread disinformation. Super, super long line for a bill, but you get the gist of it. Like it basically gives you what this bill is about disinformation whenever we are thinking about elections and using AI to generate materially deceptive content. And here I'm thinking about the ways that both DeSantis and President Trump has used generative AI to make each other look bad. And it's not just limited to them, other candidates have used similar technologies as well. And this bill is led by Senator Klobuchar, Hawley, Coons, and Collins. There's also the the Real Political Ads Act, much shorter bill name, but it does similar things, and that's led with Klobuchar, Bennett, and Booker. But also thinking about like, what does this necessarily look like? What are they targeting and why are they targeting this demographic specifically and this issue specifically? From the Council on Foreign Relations, they recently did a podcast episode on this. It's called AI's Impact on the 2024 US Elections with Jessica Brandt. It's also 30 minutes long. So if you just want to watch more episodes about AI and US elections, definitely give that a listen. I read the gist of what they're talking about, and I want to share some of that with you. So, directly quoted from the Council on Foreign Relations, or yeah, is that? Yes, Council on Foreign Relations. I don't know why I put CFL. Ignore that in my but Council on Foreign Relations article, they specifically cite how, quote, GOP presidential candidate Ron DeSantis shared a deep fake of former President Donald Trump hugging and kissing Anthony Fauci, end quote. And which, if you see this automatically, you're like, oh my God, like Trump is colluding with Anthony Fauci. Like, how could he do this if you were like a hardcore Trump supporter, right? And so using these deep fakes as a means to trash on your status, trash on your person. And it's not just limited to these candidates, as I said. But also the other thing is, quote, the Democratic Party has started testing AI to draft campaign fundraising emails, end quote. And so what that could look like is instead of getting personalized written by interns, approved by staff, right? Or even written by staff and then approved by the candidate themselves or approved by the politician themselves. It could just be written by AI, approved then and there, and then sent out to voters. And so there's this third party sort of in the communication between constituents and the politicians that are representing these constituents. And there's a lot of concern, especially ethics wise, about what this means and what this does for our modes of communication with each other. If we are a democracy and we say we're representing the people's voices and we're continually talking to the people's voices, what does it mean then when our mode of communication is mainly driven by AI written correspondence and not necessarily like one on one conversations? This isn't to say that they aren't doing town halls and meeting with their constituents on a daily basis. It's just saying that whenever you're not interacting with the majority of your base, what does that do for our democracy? And I think these are all interesting questions that we are thinking about as people who are of voting age, but also extempers are thinking about when they're getting questions about AI technology. And I think a lot of these questions will talk about AI technology in the context of elections, because usually that'll happen, especially in 2024 when it's an election year. Like, I remember getting so many questions about that in 2020 when I was competing in Extemp. So I imagine that's just gonna happen. But it's not simply how it can manipulate us, not how AI can manipulate us, but also relating to issues of data privacy as well. Also relating to issues of the arts and culture, because AI is being used to generate movie scripts and artworks and paintings and photographs. So it calls into question like what happens to the people that do this for a living. So right now, it's not Terminator, right? Where AI is developing their own consciousness and they have a human form. Well, okay, maybe I'm speaking too soon, but like, it's not like that just yet where we're at war with AI so physically, but it's hard to ignore that the impacts that AI already has on our everyday life. I'm thinking about when I looked on Instagram and there's Kendall Jenner calling herself Billy, which is Meta's AI chatbots, which is literally straight out of a Black Mirror episode because they're creating these chatbots to seem so humanistic and to be your friend, quote unquote, but they're not real people. And with like Snapchat, like friend bot or whatever, I forget, but I think at this point, and I think Spencer, you'll agree with me, is it's that it's not a if, but it's a when, and we should be talking more about AI's abilities and the impacts that it has on our future.
I 100% agree about that. I've done for this is maybe a sidebar for a minute, and I'm sorry. I've I've always been really interested in like the impact that technology has in like terms of the political sphere, and that's because like we have seen technology really change a lot of things for good and for bad. Um, a couple of examples, real fast trigger warning, is Facebook was the reason as to why a genocide started in Myanmar, right? Like everything started off of Facebook there, and we see what's happening with the Rohingya Muslims, and it's a real scenario that's very dangerous. But we've also seen technology do a lot of good, which allowed for a coup to happen in Egypt for independence to a democracy. So it's really an interesting when we're talking about artificial intelligence, it's actually pretty interesting as what we're looking at about with its abilities and impacts on our future. It's really either positive or it's going to be super negative. Now, it also depends on the context, who's using it, and what's around it. And that's going to bring us into a very good discussion today. And we'll start with you on the question, which is, are AI technologies a threat to global democracies? And personally, I think this is actually a fantastic question when we're talking about the changes that we've just seen this year with AI.
Yeah, I think first of all, I know we talked to the last episode that we've been having like a 3 episode streak where we agree with each other, but I think this is probably the first episode where we have like a much more diverse opinion on like a question. And mainly because I'll start with when we take a look at this question, it is asking us like, are AI technologies a threat to global democracy? First of all, I think there are terms that you do have to outline in terms of what you mean because they're so broad, and it could be a number of things. For example, like what is threat? Like what do you mean by threat? Are you saying that it just completely gets rid of democracy at all, or is it just like the potential for misinformation and disinformation to spread? There are differences in what that threat, quote unquote, looks like. And then also thinking about like global democracy, there isn't global democracy. Like there are countries that do not have democracy and do not spread information the way that we do in the United States. And I think that's definitely something that we should consider. And so if you're thinking about like global democracy, you're probably referring to countries that have and host elections. But you're also thinking about countries that quote unquote host elections, but don't actually because they manipulate poll numbers. Not saying that that doesn't like happen to other countries as well. It's just seems more reported on in certain countries. And so I think understanding that perspective, it's easy to think, oh, this is a straight yeah, like definitely AI technologies are a threat to global democracy. But also emphasizing on what Spencer said is that AI has done a lot of good as well. And I think its ability to tell us ways that we can identify what is real, what is fake, and like really make us think about these questions. I think that's like powerful in AI is it allows us to really deeply question like where is it that we're getting our information, making us more aware of the information that we're reading and like doing secondary research in order to get a better understanding. I think AI does like the questions, I mean, and the problem that we talk of with AI has allowed us to have a more long and lengthy conversation around where we get our information and why we think certain things are true. But I also do think that like AI has the ability to tell us about a host of different things that are happening around the world. And whether that is just through social media or whether that is just through like being able to spread information in a really fast and easy manner, I think either of those things qualify as like answers to saying how AI can be beneficial and not necessarily a threat to global democracy. Because in order for democracy to function in my books is that you need the people to have access to the information that would inform them of the decisions that they're making. Otherwise, it's not that you're making these decisions of your own free will and you have like all of the I guess, items laid out on the table, right? But I do also see that there is a vision for answering yes to this question of are AI technologies a threat to global democracy? Because I think in my whole section, I've talked about how AI has been manipulated to do just that, you know, threaten democracy because it is spreading disinformation and misinformation to voters, and because it has this real ability to divide and add like a third party between constituent real people and the representative, which is another real person. And so I do think that maybe this isn't as black or white a question as we have previously talked about it before recording this episode. But you know, like those are just my thoughts at the moment, and I think my thoughts will evolve and change the more that AI evolves and changes as well, because it brings up new questions about ethics and things like that. And I think that like we're trying to get other people to recognize these questions as well. And so if we are actively engaged in these questions, doesn't mean that there's a just complete threat to our democracy and that there is hope and it's not just all doom and gloom. Because we can't ignore that AI has had its benefits, but we also can't ignore the ways that AI is very destructive as well.
This question does suffer the definition debate, and YuYu is right. Like, how are you going to define a threat? What is a threat to a global democracy? I think global democracy is probably a poor term that was used by Extemp Central. I'll be totally fair. I think it should just be our AI technology is a threat to democracies, because global democracy is kind of weird. It's a weird way to phrase that. But YuYu's right. Like, what is a democracy? And I don't mean to get into this really weird philosophical debate, but everybody's got their own definition of democracy. People interpret democracy in very different ways. The most common definition of a democracy to help our extempers is simply free and fair elections. That's my political science degree in a nutshell. Free and fair elections equals democracy. Hey, so that's what you want to think about. Are AI technologies a threat to free and fair elections? That's how I would interpret this question if I was to use a basic definition of democracy that everybody can associate themselves with. And I would say the answer to that is yes. Hey, there's no denying that, right? If you're creating deep fakes of, oh, look at this, President Trump is hugging and kissing Anthony Fauci when you didn't like Anthony Fauci as a Republican based off of COVID, whether that's right or wrong, hey, then you are being misinformed, which causes you to, in fact, make a poor decision and gives an unfair advantage to the Republican opponent, right? Is that a free and fair election? Well, some may say so, because at the end of the day, free and fair elections comes to voting, right? So the whole question here, though, is this a threat to free and fair elections? And I do think at some point in time it will become so, to where like the information that's given is just so misinformed that it actually harms any legitimate chances of some candidates being successful and being able to go into office. Hey, and that's hurtful for a democracy because you can lead somebody into office that may have destructive power and change a democracy to an authoritarian regime or into a dictatorship. Hey, that can happen very easily. Hey, I think another way that you could look at this is where artificial intelligence is going. And I think that's kind of a topic that we haven't really discussed too much in this episode outside of my portion that was talking about disruptive innovation, right? Is there a point in time that we can have a government that's only ran by technology? And that's a very fair question. I will probably never be able to find this article again, but I do know that this is something that was being tried in India with a government that was fully functioned by technology. And I believe it was in India's capital. Why can I not think of the name of it right now? I don't know. I did read an article about that within one of my blockchain classes that I took in college, though, is India's capital has been looking towards creating a government that is solely focused on technology. This is a very interesting question. If we have a government that's ran by technology, is that like that can in fact pose to be a threat, because that's no longer a democracy. That's now a technological democracy of sorts. And we've heard claims from people before in the past about wanting to make government technologically based, right? Because they think it would give more voices towards the citizens to make decisions about certain pieces of legislation. So I think the short and sweet here is democracy is probably going to struggle as AI continues. Another thing to think about is AI is generally speaking anti-government. So when we're talking like governmental stuff here and we're talking about AI, the two of them do not get along with each other. AI is always going to do things that is against the government, and government's going to do things that's going to try to regulate against the government. That's what we often see when it comes to AI and why we have these debates. So supportive of AI means that you're supportive of like less government. Supportive of government means you're less supportive of AI. That's usually how that all works. So at the end of the day, AI will do anything it can to take down government.
Capital's New Delhi.
Thank you. I totally. I don't know why I blanked on that. Like that's the most obvious like capital in the world in my opinion. But like
Like
okay,
other people have like thought of it as like Bombay or like Mumbai, but it's New Delhi. So
but yeah, New Delhi's actually trying to create it like like just a city government of focused only on technology, which is really fascinating. I don't know if they're going through with it still, but that's the last that I have read on that.
yeah, that is really interesting. I will say though, like that Spencer did make a generalization, and that's not always the case, in my opinion, that like supporting AI means that you don't support governance. And there's like nuances to it and like different reasons as to why, but I just think that like it doesn't necessarily mean that you support AI and that means like you want to take down the government because AI, free information, whatever, right? Because like if we think about it, like free speech is and like access to information is like something that we've been talking about frequently, and that is not antithetical to governance. So forming your opinion on that, like having access to that information is really important to do that, first of all. But second of all, I also think that like when we get to the question of AI and what it can do, like I'm not necessarily saying that whatever is generated by AI is the truth and creation of whatever it is that we should believe in, right? But we also know that AI technology has been wrong, and AI statistical analysis also has been wrong as well, because it is human made, it's human informed. Whatever flaws we have, whatever assumptions we make, AI is going to take on those assumptions as well. And so I think one thing that we should be aware of when we're talking about this is that knowing that people will take AI information, take AI technology and say like whatever is generated is brilliant or whatever is generated is so true, it's factual. Like you can't just like avoid that because it's just true. Like I think that is a falsehood that we have. We shouldn't make that assumption. We should really look into like where this technology is getting the data, how they're processing the data, and like what the algorithm is doing, right? Because those are all important factors to take into and to really analyze in order for you to make a decision on whether or not AI is just disruptive to democracy, right? Because AI could just be an extension of what we've been doing, but because it is under the guise of AI, people will believe it more. And that might be the reason why AI is destructive to democracies, because it shifts what is truth and the beliefs away from humans and human based research to like AI based research or whatever that looks like in the future, right? And so I think these are all important things to think about and to consider. And it is a scary, scary world. I know this is supposed to be like a fun, fluffy, funny episode, but I don't know. I just feel like more things we cover, the more sad it gets.
I I definitely did allude to the beginning of this episode that we were gonna probably get into something that was probably pretty dark, right? Um,
Yeah.
and the fact is, yes, I did make a generalization, right? But most of the time, like new developments of artificial intelligence usually is pretty anti-government. What we've seen in the past, like Bitcoin is its own currency. Like most of the time, like currency is well, all the time, currency is government. Government makes mints or coins, mints or dollars, right? Bitcoin mints itself, and it's not government controlled. That's an idea, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm also thinking that like
but yes,
it's like able to be controlled by government and
yes,
by government.
and
So
and that's kind of what I meant is like generally speaking, whenever we have new advancements in AI, we often see it usually be a lot more libertarian and because it's usually going against the government. Technology and government usually never collide. Now there are exceptions to that rule. You are correct. Hey,
I also think
they
like newer research being done and also like newer voices in Congress, AI has become a big thing that they're talking about regulating. Like
yeah,
that's why we see all of these legislation regarding AI.
and it is an important topic. I think you could even answer this question like with the legislation that's being worked on, right? Like UU's got some great points there. Like there's two very big pieces of legislation. Obviously, they're not being talked in the news, but there's two big pieces of legislation that the US Congress is trying to pass right now, because AI is getting really big and is continuing to expand. So at like what point do you need to limit technology? And the part that gets even more scary is, and this doesn't get discussed in the book, but it is what we've seen in the past, is when you put a regulation on AI finds a way around it. And that's what makes it harder. Is like you can only regulate it so much until it advances past that regulation. So regulating only is going to stop it a little bit, but it will eventually keep going, which makes it even more of a threat to global democracies, if anything. So the short and sweet of this answer is, and once again, you and I are both saying yes. The short and sweet is this answer is a yes. Democracies probably will face threats from AI because AI is very difficult to control. And I think taking the broad answer to this question is AI is difficult to control, and democracies will probably not be able to do anything as it continues to advance. I will add that there's maybe like a chance that some democracies survive if we were to see all of this happen. And this is very hypothetical into the future, but we obviously don't know how far AI is going yet, and that makes that a very difficult question as well. Is like, what else are we about to see?
I did give a no answer, Spencer.
Oh,
um,
I remember that you gave a no answer. I just forgot.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
Uh huh.
Selective.
It wasn't that I wasn't paying attention. Yes.
Oh, anyway, I think this has been a great conversation, really interesting information. I don't know, I didn't really expect it to go on for so long because I don't know. I looked at the topic that we had chosen and I was like, oh, what else can I say about this? I think both of us are kind of like, yeah, there's not more to say about it, but I think we're just saying that like conversations will be had. We will not be part of those conversations because we are not ignorant. But I do think conversations will be had, and there is more to say about AI as AI grows.
And that's like where we're going in the future is both good, but also bad simultaneously. And everything that we have to do to make this time is it can be scary. And it is something to be concerned about for our future. So,
Yep. Well, long conversation aside, I hope you get the one in the round. If you don't, that's okay. Let us know how you did. Let us know how we did. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to DM us on Instagram. I think both our handles are somewhere in the video. I think our emails are probably in the video too. Well, whatever. Oh, okay, just our Instagram. But if you don't feel comfortable individually DMing us, feel free to reach out to the Half Hour Extemp podcast on Instagram. We're more active there. I know I keep saying Twitter, but I just realized I don't really use Twitter all that much. And, yeah, so follow our Instagram. And don't forget to also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our episodes come out on our YouTube channels earlier than they